I try to live my life without too many regrets. I've had highs and lows like everyone else, sure, but I do what I can to not worry about too much about what could have happened if I made a different choice. If I maybe haven't taken the road less traveled. I figured everyone makes the best decisions they can with the information they have available to them at the time. Going through all the what ifs is ridiculous, because the only way you would have made a different choice is if you had some other detail, which of course you didn't. Hindsight is perfect, and even then, you can never be sure exactly what the sequence of the events might have looked like if you were gone right instead of left. And yet, there is one choice I made, one road I took, and that I just can't help but wonder how things may have turned out, if only they'd done something different. My job has me move around pretty regularly. I'm not going to get into what I know. It has no bearing on this story, but a couple of years ago, I was working on the Philadelphia and living on this other side of the Delaware River in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. I'm originally from northwestern Pennsylvania, and since this was the coldest I had been to home since I moved out of college, I took the chance to go and see my parents whenever I could. I knew I'd be moving again before long, and my folks aren't getting any younger, so I tried to find a weekend every month or two to make a 7-hour trip to visit them. If I had been thinking about it when I was looking for places to rent, I would have probably tried to live on the west side of Philadelphia instead of New Jersey to avoid the traffic during rush hour. But the time I realized it, the lease was signed and there was not much I can do. The drive to my hometown was pretty boring. Honestly, I'd take this Ben Franklin bridge across the river, head up I-1476 for an hour or so, and then embarked on the long slog across basically the entire expanse of PA on 180, before another hour north on 179 to Erie, Pennsylvania, where I'm from. The only variance in the drive was how long it would take to get me through Philly, because I got on the 4676 extension. I could typically predict my ETA within 5 to 10 minutes. For my second summer in New Jersey, I'd taken 2 weeks off and planned on spending the second week in Erie. Things changed for that first Wednesday, though, because of a big storm blew through and knocked the power out in a good part of the area where I was living. Dealing with the 90-degree heat with no air conditioning wasn't something I particularly felt like spending the first half of my vacation doing. So after one uncomfortably sweaty night, I let my parents know I'll be heading over for a few days early. In retrospect, I could have left that first thing in the morning, but because I had a couple of things to take care of before heading out, by the time I finally got on the road that Thursday, it was past lunchtime and getting on the toward mid-afternoon. For whatever reason, the traffic in Philly was particularly heavy. By the time I finally got through town, I was a good hour behind schedule, still based on my normal lifetime. I figured I'd still be able to make it early enough to grab dinner and a beer with my dad and my brother before crashing for the night. Two things I hadn't taken into consideration were the number of the folks that apparently had the same idea to get out of town that I did, and the road construction that must have sprung up at the time since my last trip home. My interstate highway system was a heck of a thing. Being able to zip along at 65 or 70, or in some remote places like West Texas, even faster, makes cross-country automobile travel take a fraction of the hours it would otherwise. I can't tell you the number of times my folks have reminiscent about those days where before the interstate, when we were going to see a friends outside of DC, and would take almost twice as long as it does now. What truly is remarkable to me, though, is even though for the entire system of highways was built from start to finish was in merely 35 years, it sure seems like when a part of it go under construction, they stay that way forever. Traffic was uncharacteristically heavy, but moving. I was making a decent time until I saw the first orange warning signs, letting me know that the 4 lanes were reducing to 3, then 2, and then 1. Hundreds of cones stretched down the road as far as the eye could see, and I could certainly see as the cars in front of me reached to a complete and total standstill. It was one of the worst deadlocks I've ever been in. Seriously, I think I moved a mile an hour. After about 3 hours, my stomach started grumbling. With an exit out just on my head and no end to the traffic jam on sight, I got off and found a diner to go grab some dinner. Even if traffic miraculously picked up, I still had followed 5 hours to drive in ahead of me. So at that point I know for sure it was going to be pretty late that I was getting in. After finished eating, I got back on the road. Things looked like they were picking up for a good couple miles, but then I came back to the end of the jam and it was right back to waiting. We were moving a bit better now. I think averaging about 5 miles an hour at this point, but at least the sun started edging towards the horizon. I pulled out my phone and started to see if Google Maps could have me a clue on if there's any kind of workaround. It's a funny thing about human nature. Most of us don't like to sit still. Studies at airports show that people would rather walk farther to baggage to claim their luggage, even if the total time would have been less if they had slightly longer wait at a plane side. Well, the power of the internet appeared to be in my favor. Though I-80 still showed as dark as a red band for another 50 miles or so. There was a southbound country road coming up in just a few miles, and a northbound like a couple after that. Either which it looked like that, or they let me past was the worst of the traffic. Since I spent the better part of the day sitting on the road, my patience was about to worn out. I opted to take the soundboard road, even if though the app told me it would ultimately take about 30 minutes longer to get to my parents' house. I just wanted to get moving again, and reasoned at that rate. It might just take me more than 30-minute difference to get to the northbound routeway, and that is a choice that will haunt me till the day I die. I made the turnoff and immediately felt my mood improve. The signs alternated, limiting my speed between 35 and 40 miles an hour. But even that seems like a flying compared to the logjam I'd spent the last several hours in. The drive was interesting. The road started a little twisty, with plenty of elevation changes as it curved up and around the hills of central Pennsylvania. It took me on a general southwest diagonal, but I turned and doubled back on itself for that first 30 minutes or so. I got my regular views as the stalled traffic on I-80 back on itself, but of course, pretty soon after that, though, just about the time that the sun was dipping down beneath the couple hills in my rearview mirror, the road took a long curving track and carried me down anyway, out of sight, out of the interstate. Now, something a lot of people don't realize is how big of a state Pennsylvania is. Sure, there is plenty of bigger ones, but PA is deceptively big, and it's remote, isolated. Hell, the translation of the name means Penn's Woods, after all. The Blair Witch Project didn't have to embellish the aspect of the state. The fact that you could head into the woods and walk for dozens of miles in any direction without seeing anything, like another human being. It's got its decent numbers of big cities. Pittsburgh and Philly both have enough population to support major sports teams. But anyway, from those centers of development, the Harrisburgs and the Pottsvilles and the Scrotons and what you have you, there's a whole lot of nothing and trees, and dark, lonely road. Such was the road I was traveling that night, winding through the twists and turns of the Appalachian foothills. I have moved around a lot, I mentioned, traveled through most of the continental states. Anyway, I sometimes used to wonder, when I would be driving along the path of Absol, surrounded by the only untamed wilderness. That must have been like a construct of such road. Would it have been like that before men had intruded with civilization and our machines? What had lived there? I don't wander anymore. Not since the night when I went left instead of right. The way continued to twist, back, forth, up, down, as I wound deeper into the foothills. The trees grew thicker, branches from either side of the road reaching almost touching, forming a natural canopy 20 feet up that blocked out such much of my view of the sky and the stars above. I drove down with my high beams on because the idea of streetlights had never entered the minds of whoever built this road. These paved lines were old and not well cared for, and I found myself gradually striding at the faded double-line peloton running down the middle of the two lanes to keep some distance between myself and the trees that increasingly encroached the pavement's edge. I've never been practically a good navigator. My parents used to say because I spent my childhood with my nose pushed into a book during the car rides. But I personally just think it's because I'm bad at it. So despite there being no possible way I could be lost, there was no other roads I could have possibly turned onto and gotten off track. I more and more frequently found myself checking my phone to ensure I was still on the right path, which is now I almost ran into another car. My mind was wandering, thinking about the fact that my signal bars had dropped and remained at 0 for the last 20 minutes, and what possible implications that would mean if I should have some kind of emergency. I raised my eyes back to the road after Google Maps confirmed, for the probability of the 20th time, I was still on good in my route choice, and after my brain took a beat to process what I rapidly was approaching was a vehicle, stopped in the middle of the lane and slammed on my foot onto the brake. I stopped in time, but not by much, maybe 5 feet separating from the hood and the other's car's rear bumper. My heart was pounding in my chest as adrenaline coursed through my body, but my fear quickly gave way to anger. Seriously, what the hell was this guy doing? Not only he was stopped in the middle of the road, but all of his lights were off. If I hadn't had my high beams on, there was a good chance I wouldn't have seen him before I was practically on top of him. Even if I hadn't been checking my phone, I could feel my pulse beating on the vein on the side of my neck. I'm not somebody practically prone to road rage, and after a couple of quick breaths, I managed to get a hold of myself. Not wanting to outright alarm anyone that might still be in the vehicle, I shifted into reverse and back up about 20 feet, popping my hazards on. That was when I started to notice a few odd things about the dropped car, more than just the fact that the lights were out. Of course, it was halted directly into the middle of the road, but that wasn't unreasonable, since there were any shoulders to peak that the driver could have moved it over to. The strange thing, though, was that not all the doors were open. There were those on the driver's side and even crossing over slightly onto the oncoming lane, and beyond that further observation, I see an item drop down into the road by the rear driver's side door, something that appeared to be a child's stuffed animal. I considered my options and after a few seconds, decided that I would have to go against my better judgment, keep on my merry way, and head outside to get a better view of what was going on. I said earlier that my job doesn't have anything to do with this story, which is mostly true. Before you judge my decisions too harshly, it bears mentioning that I've spent some time in the military, an obligation to help the people that have been drilled into me over the years. I had seen through this while deployed to feel that I could handle myself. And so I got out of my car, but I kept running. I popped the trunk to grab a flashlight and keep it there, and left my headlights on so I could see what I was doing. I looked up and down the road, hoping to spy any signs of cars approaching, but no luck. "Hello?" I called up to the other car as I cautiously made my approach, circling around to the left in the middle of the road, so I'd be able to get a close look inside before I got too close. "Anyone there?" No answer. The beams from my headlights helped some, but there were still enough shadows to obscure the car's interior. Shining my flashlight, easily determined that there was no one inside though, I moved closer, stooping down by the rear door to pick up the fallen object off the ground. It was a child's toy, it just as I suspected, a stuffed rabbit with well-worn patches, showing the signs of frequent love. I frowned. If the folks traveling in the car had hitched a ride with a passerby, they would have taken the rabbit, or the kid would have thrown it in contemplation. I shut the rear door and moved up to the front. I put my hand on the hood and found it was still warm to the touch. That meant that it couldn't have been there for terribly long. I slid into the driver's seat to try and figure out if there was some kind of medical issues that would be forced the car to stop, and was startled to find a set of keys still dangling from the ignition. Pressing the brake, I turned the key and the engine started to light up. Headlights and the dome lights of the roof sprang to life. Fuel, oil, temperature, battery, all the gauges looked good, not even a check engine light. Coarser and coarser, curious and curiouser. Then I saw the purse in the passenger seat. I picked it up, a small brown shoulder bag. I briefly rummaged through around before finding a wallet inside. Everything appeared to be intact. It had been $40 in cash, a couple of credit cards, a gym membership, and a Sam's Club card. The driver's license had an owner named Mary Walker, and a pretty blonde that had just turned 30 the month before. A couple of pictures showed Mary in stage poses, sitting on the blanket under the tree, the leaves of which they were red and yellow, captured the frill of autumn. A huge, bearded lumberjack of a man hugged her from behind, a small ponytailed girl with a goofy, over-exaggerated smile on her lap. I felt the hairs on my back and my neck stand up, a shiver run down the base of my spine. Something was really wrong with the situation. I put everything back in the purse and returned to the seat, turned off the car and then got out, shutting the driver's door behind me. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and dialed 911, holding it over my head to try and get a connection. No luck. Cursing softly, I jammed the read end call button and moved around to the passenger side of the car. I played my flashlight around and noticed some sort of foliage at the edge of the road was bent and trembled, like someone had walked through it. I didn't have enough woodcraft to be able to judge how long ago they may have passed, but even then I couldn't imagine the scenario for why they would have gone wandering. Shining my light into the woods, the beam only extended for maybe 30 feet through the trees before being effectively swallowed by the greedy blackness. Looking at the flattened foliage and the stuffed rabbit in my hand, at the dark trees crowding maliciously, my thoughts teetered back and forth between what I should do. I made up my mind. I had been trained to help people. It was hardwired into the system. There was a child somewhere in the woods. I raised my foot to take a step onto the beaten path. That's when a white flicker of movement entered the very edge of my flashlight beam. It was Mary Walker. She was naked and walking stiffly, unnaturally. Her arms were swaying out of sync as the rest of her body, like marionettes manipulated by the inexperienced puppeteer. "Hello?" her voice called out. "Anyone here?" More shapes come into view behind her, shambling along. There were the bearded man who must have been Mary's husband, and there her little daughter, the owner of the well-loved rabbit, both naked and moving oddly, as their wife and mother. And now I could tell there were more, many more. Their forms were distinct out of the direct light, but so many they had caused the darkness to pitch and swell with their odd, staggering passage. Their voices were the chorus. "Hello," they called. "Anyone there?" But turning back the questions I asked only a few short minutes ago, when I approached the abandoned car. I took a stumbling step back, away from the woods and approaching the automatons, tripling over the walker's car. Catching my balance, I involuntarily shone my light up the pitch recess of the branches, and in doing so, could just make out barely a sort of blackness crouched hidden in the upper hit limits, a void even darker than the trees. It was my imagination, whose lines were of pure blackness that extended from the concealed mass and seemed to have pierced the flesh of Mary Walker and her kin and the countless of her shapes moving in the concert with them. "Hello? Anyone there?" I sprinted then back to my car, engine mercifully still running, headlights and hazard flashing welcomely. "Hello?" I shifted into reverse, miraculously trying to keep though my head, avoid running off the road as I completed a 3-point turn. "Anyone there?" I chanced with a glance on my rearview mirror. The pale form of Mary Walker stood halted, just at the edge of the forest where the trees met the road. One hand was raised, beckoning for me to turn, or perhaps waving a goodbye. Her face mask of confused sadness. I pressed on the gas and drove back the way I came. I did not look back again. The rest of the trip was a fog, and at some point after I made it back to the interstate, I called my parents letting them know that I wouldn't be getting in until late. I drove in autopilot, the traffic jam having cleared while I was off. I thought about calling 911, but I didn't. And what would I have told him? And what to end? There was no one left that helped. I try not to go through life with too many regrets, wondering about the what ifs. But this choice. What if I had left early in the day? What if I hadn't stopped for dinner? Maybe I would have still gone left. Maybe I would have been there in time to help with the walkers. Maybe I would have been taken aback from that black fishing in the dark. What if I had gone right? I would still ignorantly be going through life, unknowing to what the other things were out there. I try not to think of this too often, but every now and then, my thoughts turn to the stuffed rabbit. It wasn't until I reached my parents' house that night and I realized that I still had clutched my hand. I used to wonder, before a man brought to the roads and civilization, it was the wilderness like? What have lived there? I don't wander anymore. I can't afford to. At least if I don't want to wake up screaming. And no matter how bad the traffic is, I will always stick to the interstate. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video. And I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, stay pretty.